Good evening and welcome. My name is Michael Greyeyes, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Theater at York University. I'm speaking to you today from Los Angeles. This is the traditional territories of the Chumash, Tongva, Kizh, and Tataviam peoples. I thank them as original caretakers of these territories for allowing me to live and work here. And to create hopefully beautiful work to share with you all. This is the third Terry Talks, and this lecture revolves around the speech. In season 1 of Rutherford Falls, Terry Thomas, the character I play, was afforded a number of fantastic, show-stopping speeches. From the very first one at the end of episode 1 to the incredible Mohawk land acknowledgement in episode, I think it was 6. The wonderful, wonderful speeches he has with the lawyer from Rutherford Inc. But there is no speech like the one from episode 4. Episode 4 is named Terry Thomas, after Terry's character. In the reviews that the show has seen and that have been written about us, many of them mention episode 4 as a standout in the season. I'm so proud of this. In Terry Thomas, episode 4, we are allowed to dive fully into the backstory of Terry, as well as examine his complex and beautiful relationships with his family, Renee, his wife, Maya, and his son, Jimmy. Last week, when the wonderful Kimberly Norris and Kimberly Guerrero Norris and I were talking about that family, the Thomas family, we celebrated what was unique about them and how the Thomas family was in fact a provocation to modern media representations of Native people. Episode 4, of course, is landmark television. At the time, I remember having such an incredible experience on the show, enjoying the complexity and sophistication of the writing, the comedy, working in a new idiom, dealing with an episodic television, which I'd never been a regular on television before. So I was able to work from episode to episode across this 10 episode season to understand how to build a character, how to adjust course, during the course of this long arc. And I wanted to share with you how I, as an actor, and certainly as a citizen and Native man, would approach a piece of writing like this. But in order for me to dive into that fully, in a truly granular way, I think we have to go back a few years to look at some specific instances and work that I had undertaken that allowed me to have the skill sets and the kinds of experience necessary for me to tackle that piece of writing. So we begin looking backwards. My first question is, what is a speech? You may think that's somewhat facetious, but it's not, actually. Speeches, of course, are an important part of many theater traditions, many performance traditions, and of course, within the medium of cinema itself. A speech, very, very simply, is sustained energy, sustained thought. A speech encapsulates so much, but it is the job of the actor to sustain this arc of energy. There can be no drops in that arc, or we lose the audience, or the speech is over. So for lack of a better way of describing it, a speech is a little mini marathon. It is a sustained idea, a sustained sets, multiple sets of activity and response. It's a tightrope walk. And much of the training actors receive prepares us for delivering these kinds of speeches. When you think about monologues, you think truly, about an actor simply learning a speech, a paragraph even, and we have to develop some kind of process, some kind of work process that allows us to remember the words, contextualize what's happening in that character's life, and command the moment. It's a wonderful training, and I think every actor on the planet has endured the difficult process of learning a monologue. But some of these speeches that I've experienced in my career as of late required a whole different kind of preparation. The first example of the kind of work or skill sets I needed, tools, came to me in South Africa in 2015. I was fortunate enough to have been hired to work on a program called Saints and Strangers. It was for Discovery, and we were filming it in Cape Town. In this particular miniseries, all the native characters spoke in Abenaki, specifically the dialect of Western Abenaki. We had a marvelous language coach and consultant, Jesse Bruchak, who taught us all of our dialogue phonetically. And then we would, because with any language, there's never one-to-one translation. There is always a kind of process of translation that requires us English speakers to rethink worldview. A good example of this is in one of the dialects in South Africa, how you describe a day as being truly, truly hot, like it's truly hot outside. Um, the direct translation is the fish are jumping, which means that the day is so hot that the ambient temperature is so hot that it makes the water hot. And the fish are jumping out of the water to cool themselves. So when you go, boy, it's hot, imagine saying, it's so hot, the fish are jumping. So again, it's a process of learning another kind of thought mechanism. Jesse took us through that process rigorously, meticulously. And he employed a marvelous sort of technique to help us remember our speeches. I've written about it before, but I'm happy to share that with you again today. Jesse is a black belt jiu-jitsu instructor. And so he really believes in drilling. And he would drill us once we had learned the language, once we had managed to learn the syllables, the sounds, and of course that the unique translation that we actors would have to understand what we are saying and how to place emphasis, how to manage the syntax of the language to express what our characters needed and wanted to say. And once we had that down, Jesse would just drill us. He would just ask us to repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. One of the techniques that he did was he would take us out onto the streets of Cape Town, and he would make us walk with him, down the street, across the street, into buildings, downstairs, upstairs. So we would be managing our physical environment all the time, talking. So we were walking and talking and, dodging people and waiting for lights and, running through traffic, all while trying to say this, really complex language. That level of rigor really stayed with me. And of course, all the actors on Saints and Strangers that spoke of Anarchy spoke it almost flawlessly. That was a new level of excellence that I took with me from that project. Another thing that I noticed in the project is that my voice sounds very differently when I speak English, and when I speak an Indigenous language. Very uniquely, whenever I speak any Indigenous language, in that case, Western Abenaki, or Cree, or Lakota, my voice drops a register. So the very pitch of my voice is lower when I speak Indigenous languages. This is curious to me. I thought about it in 2015. I thought about it again in 2017 when I did my next film and I had to speak Lakota in that film. Speaking Indigenous languages began a process of changing my voice, building out deeper resonances in it, allowing the tones to drop more fully. I want to give you an example of a film that I did for A24 in 2017 called Woman Walks Ahead. Truly one of the greatest roles of my career. I was asked to play the Hunkpapa chief, Sitting Bull. In a crucial moment in the film, Sitting Bull, who in real life was very reluctant to speak English, although he spoke it and understood it well, delivers a speech. The filmmakers knew that they wanted it to be in Lakota, but they didn't want to subtitle it, so they had to come up with a mechanism that would allow audiences to stay in the moment with Sitting Bull as he said this, without using subtitles. The marvelous actress Rulan Tangan did a simultaneous translation as a Lakota woman who was translating it for the soldiers who were there to listen. I want to share this speech with you because without this speech, there is no way I could have ever done Terry Thomas. This is a segment from Woman Walks Ahead, directed by Susanna White and starring the wonderful Jessica Chastain, Sam Rockwell, Bill Camp, and many, many other great actors, including Chaskey Spencer, who played my nephew. Without further ado.
Chief Black Bear, please carry on with your testimony.
Itro here a printer.
He's saying that's all he has to say.
Guess the cat got his tongue. Next, we'll hear from Chief Yellowhand. Yellowhand? Then can we hear from John Grass of Minikowoju? Come on, John. Sir, maybe we should call this off.
I thought you bribed these people.
I have a list of 6 more chiefs who gave me their word they'd speak here today in favor of the Allotment Act.
Are any of them prepared to stand up?
We have a real chance here. Maybe we should just adjourn till tomorrow.
I would like to speak.
No, you won't.
He's not a registered member of any tribal council. We have the power to say no.
Power?
You want to speak, Bull? You go ahead.
General,
Let the man speak, for Christ's sake. This is a free land. What do you have to say, my old friend?
Washichuki, ahina makiyublu, umakocheki, ihangiapi, heta, makablo eche okapta pelo.
Since the white men came and broke up the grassland with his plows, the earth has turned to dust.
Makabalo, kile el, tashonka witko.
In this dust, there is the body of Crazy Horse,
Milahanska tashonke,
American Horse,
ena, sintegaleshka,
Spotted Tail,
ena, chega sapa,
Black Kettle,
ena, milawakan,
Sword,
ena, oinumpa,
2 Moons,
ito magaju,
Rain in the Face.
makabo bluchana.
When the wind blows,
Chajiwi chunyata piki ite awon umblu pelo.
blows are heroes in our faces,
Wogalaka, unkitawa piki,
our diplomats,
ena. Hopie we chashaki,
our doctors,
ena. Pejuta we chashaki,
our priests,
ena. Wakaeja. Unkitawa pi eya.
Peacock.
Our dead children.
Maka. Oblu. An wakantanka o unkia kapelo.
The Great Spirit speaks to us in clouds of dust.
Lealo. Machocheki. Yoshpushpu. Uyopreya pi.
You cannot sell
Oyake hipishnialo.
pieces of the earth
Echehe. Wakantanka. Tawayalo.
because the earth belongs to God.
Oyate ki lena. Tunkashala ya.
We must tell these people to go home, back to Washington, and not hurt the earth anymore.
Hechegala. Makocheki. Hechegala.
Enough. Enough.
We chunk opi ketalo. Nakon. Lechegala. Ke. Eash.
We will give no more of our land away,
Nakon.
not even this much.
That was a beautiful, beautiful speech written by Stephen Knight and translated by a Lakota elder named Ben Blackbear. Much thanks to Ben for helping me through that extraordinary speech. Again, you can see by watching that there was a sustained idea that he, as a character, was lifting a series of like interconnected thoughts, small arcs of thought into a larger continuum. I guess the only way to really describe that is when you are helping a young person learn how to swim. They're holding onto the side of a pool, and you stand a little bit further away, and they let go of the pool, and then they scramble over into your arms, and then you get further away. So they have to scramble through the water a little further every time, or sometimes they'll do it themselves. They'll let go and swim a little forward and then grab the wall again. So you learn to build your endurance in these small arcs of effort until you get to the point where you can swim from one side of the pool to the other. You can sustain yourself and your energy through a longer arc. The lessons that Jesse, the language teacher that he gave to me in South Africa, bore fruit in that film. I worked on that speech for over 6 weeks. It was extraordinarily difficult. Lakota is incredibly complex, sophisticated language with lots of sounds that aren't present in English. Also, the sophistication of his thought, the sophistication of his rhetoric was really profound. And I was also doing the one-to-one translations of what it meant in Lakota, what he was trying to say in the Lakota worldview, and how that connected somewhat, fairly closely to the English, but still not the same. I would run on treadmills. I would run on, I would be on a stationary bike, learning that language, headphones all the time, just listening to Ben, just listening to myself, pre-recorded. I just literally drilled that into my body through endless repetition, endless drilling. And we think to ourselves that when we film, these kinds of speeches, it's like, oh, is there one magical take? Certainly there are. But that speech we filmed all day. I began that speech roughly around 7 a.m. And we probably concluded the close-ups of that speech probably around 4 p.m. We made a lunch break. In fact, it rained at one point, and we had to stop because of thunder and rain. But I had to sustain not only the energy of the speech, but the energy of myself as an actor, as a athlete, to maintain that, literally all day, 7 a.m. till 4 or 5 p.m. I was exhausted. I was absolutely exhausted at the end of that day. But it remains one of my great achievements as an actor, I think. That speech laid the foundations for Terry Thomas. Again, in speaking Lakota, my voice dropped and deepened because I was engaging in Indigenous language. I don't know the mechanism. I don't know why. I speak in a deeper voice when I speak Indigenous languages, but I think to myself that is my true voice. And I'm able to access it, at this point in my life. Very grateful for that. Once I was hired to play Terry Thomas, of course, I talked a little bit about that in the first Terry Talks. I was incredibly nervous to be working with, such experienced and brilliant comic actors, comedic actors. But I also knew that Terry was scary. He was terrifying. He was low-key terrifying and powerful. And I knew from my other kinds of work of how to hold that idea of gravitas. That's the important thing to remember as we launch into the specifics of this speech, is that Terry is multifaceted. He has to be. He has to be charming. He has to be terrifying. He has to cajole. He has to punish. He has to uplift. He must do many, many things. So the tactics of the acting is always very fast, very agile. He's switching all the time. I wanted to share with you the script that we were working from to introduce you sort of in a visual way to the work I had to create. So we're going to go to sharing screen again, and we're going to drop into the studio draft for Terry Thomas. When it was written, it was actually the 5th episode planned, but in editing, they decided that it would be better if it came 4th. So when you see episode 105, that's how we filmed it. Rutherford Falls, 105, studio and network draft, April 21st, 2020, my mom's birthday. Act 3, 5:14, interior, Terry's office later. As Josh munches on a bag of popcorn, Terry continues to try to sell his side of things. Terry: popcorn, can you believe it? I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great low-calorie snack, but it's bordering on offensive in this case. Josh: so now what? So what now? Terry picks up a bag of popcorn and tosses it on his desk. Terry, as you can see, this is a tough situation, but I hope it will offer the Minneshanka our much deserved and long overdue resolution. Josh. Terry, you're a smart person. You have to know this isn't going to work. Terry. I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean. Josh. Nathan is clearly in over his head, but I could cite at least 15 cases where tribes unsuccessfully sued for reparations. What makes you think your case is so different, that you can win this when historically things are so stacked against the tribe? Terry is annoyed, but he tries to hide it. Terry, well, you got me on one thing. My people do have a legacy of losing the battle. Flashback to 1971. We were back with young Terry at the lemonade stand. At the end of another successful day, his mom and Jana load the supplies into their truck as Terry counts his money. Kurt approaches and Terry hands him some bills, which Kurt counts. Young Terry, brownie sold out. The last one was looking dicey, but then I told Miss Wilson, when do moms ever take a moment for themselves? It always works. Kurt smiles and hands Terry some bills. Kurt, great job. See you tomorrow. He starts to walk away, but Terry looks at the bills in his hand and stops him. Young Terry, Mr. Taylor, I think maybe you made a mistake. You gave me $3. It should be 15. It's an easy mistake to make. Hamilton and Washington look very similar, but Hamilton has a bigger forehead. Kurt, no, that's right. Young Terry, but you said 25%. Kurt, well, sure, but I have overhead costs, rent, insurance, ingredients. You don't have any overhead. In fact, I'm letting you run your business on my property. Some could say you owe me. Terry considers this. Okay, well, I'm a reasonable man. I'd take 13. Kurt, that's not how this works. I tell you what's fair. And this is fair. Young Terry, but I thought we were partners. I've been telling all my customers to shop at your bakery, even though we both know your croissants are really dry. We stung. Had a deal. Kurt shrugs and pockets the money. Kurt, welcome to the world, kid. Don't take it personally. Everything's a business. He walks away, smiling, stuffing a large wad of cash into his pocket. Young Terry's eyes narrow in anger. 5:16, interior, Terry's office, back to the scene. Fresh off this flashback, Terry's fired up, but Josh doesn't notice and continues with his line of questioning. Terry, we've lost many battles, but we've also learned great lessons from those losses. Josh, it just seems to me that even if you win the battle, what are you really winning? Giant sums of money? Terry, playful. You say that like it's a bad thing. Josh, isn't it? From the research I've done, the tenets of capitalism don't really jive with a traditional Minneshanka way of life. Terry, gonna push back on that. America only champions one form of capitalism. Tribal capitalism distributes revenue, in this case, casino revenue, to everyone in the tribe. And that is very traditional. Josh, sure, but isn't that what all capitalists say? That them making money benefits the masses? Terry, there's a fundamental difference. Major corporations, which I should point out, pay no taxes while we do. They keep all the money for those at the top. Long ago, when our men would go out on a hunt, the deer they brought back would be divided equally amongst the tribe, women and children first, so that everyone would survive. That's always been our way. For us, no one is at the top and no one is at the bottom. Josh, but this isn't a deer, Terry. This is a huge multi-million-dollar corporation. Terry, yes, which allows us to usher our old way of doing things into a new paradigm. Our tribal members still get their share of the deer, but this time it's a check. Josh, brushing this off. I don't know. Capitalism inevitably leads to exploitation. It doesn't matter how you dress it up. That's what this casino is. Don't you feel like you're selling out your culture by embracing such a corporate mindset? Terry shoots Josh a terse smile. He's had enough. He grabs Josh's phone and pauses the recording. Terry, what I'm about to say is completely off the record, but I want you to hear it. Josh nods. Terry continues. For someone who claims to give a voice to the voiceless, you have a real problem listening. First of all, you will never grasp a traditional Minnesota way of life because you come from an individualistic society that values the self of the whole. Gestures to Josh. Doesn't matter how you dress it up. That's why you're choosing to focus on some purity test instead of what we're actually trying to achieve here. You ever heard of the 7 generations? Josh scrambles through his folder. I have an article about it here somewhere. It's an Iroquois practice to ensure that the earth and our language and our people will not only exist, but will thrive 7 generations from now. That the decisions we make today will have an impact long after we're gone. Everything I do and every move I make is to ensure the success of my nation. Flashback to Terry's childhood bedroom, 1971. Terry lays on his bed, headphones on, listening to Janice tapes, stewing over what Kurt said. Terry in voiceover. Growing up, I didn't get to learn a lot of my traditional ways, but I did learn the great American pastime, which is power. Power, Josh, is a zero-sum game. Young Terry bolts up. If you have more of it, I have less. And if you have more and I have less, then you can treat me however you want. Young Terry finds the envelope labeled music camp and he takes out all the cash. Interior grocery store. Young Terry stands at a checkout stand as a cashier rings him up. He's buying 10 boxes of brownie mix. She looks at his purchase quizzically. If we want to ensure that this tribe has a successful life, one that can maintain our traditions, art, and culture, well, unfortunately, that takes power. And power comes from money. Exterior Rutherford Street flashback later. Young Terry meticulously cuts and arranges his brownies on a paper plate next to his lemonade. Young Terry takes a deep breath. He hopes betting on himself will work. Terry. The casino is a means to an end. It's the industry of this time. 400 years ago, it was fur trading. 50 years ago, it was manufacturing. And long after I'm dead, there will be Minnesota figuring out how to master the next one. Just then, the customer approaches. Young Terry immediately puts his shine on, big smile, and starts a sales pitch we can't hear. Back to Terry's office. Because that's what we do, Josh. Those of us who fight this battle. We do whatever we have to. I've learned to play this game out of bare-knuckle necessity. And while it might not make for a feel-good story, I won't rest until my tribe gets every single thing that was taken from them. The people I'm up against have no idea what it feels like to lose everything. They've never had to claw their way back to zero. That's another concept you wouldn't understand. Because you've never had to. And you never will. Terry stares a hole through his head. Josh is floored. Terry turns the recording back on. Terry. Stage direction reads, super smiley. Josh, it's been wonderful talking to you. Would it be possible to get a copy of this recording for my files? Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any follow-up questions. And Geraldine has some publicity shots if you need them. I'm partial to the one of me and Michelle Obama. Terry shakes Josh's hand and gestures to Geraldine, who is waiting to escort him out. What a speech, what amazing couple of scenes. Huge props must go to Rupinder Gill. Rupinder Gill wrote episode 4, Terry Thomas, and she is a brilliant writer, well known for a great body of work that includes Schitt's Creek and Our Show and many others. Interestingly enough, Rupinder is also Canadian. I'm Canadian, and the actor in the scene with me is marvelous Dustin Milligan, also Canadian. So there was a triumvirate of Canucks in this particular episode. Unintentional, I'm sure, but we brought a little bit of our northern magic to bear on this particular show. The young actor who plays young Terry is a marvelous young man named Darius Etienne. And he was so great in the role. Of course, it's not a speech, it's not a monologue. The speech is actually an incredible conversation between Dustin's character and myself, between Josh and Terry. So to call it a speech is actually a bit of a misnomer. It's simply, a really beautiful dialogue between two characters. But everyone calls it the speech, and we're calling it the speech too. Sierra Teller Ornelas and our incredible showrunner, of course, helped shape that speech. She's described it as the way, the generations ahead of her had spoken and thought. Half the writers on our show are Native, so we had input from many, many voices. Our director is the great Sidney Freeland, who is Navajo. I can't tell you how important it was for me to have this kind of support, Indigenous support around me as I tackled these scenes. It's really, really important. I'll talk a little bit about that later on in terms of tonality. But how does one go about tackling a showstopper? Of course, I'd learned that drilling, you must drill and drill and drill until you know those lines, front and back. I knew that I had to do lots of physical activity while I was running lines, so that as I was introduced to new blocking, which often happens on the day, standing for this section of the speech wouldn't throw me because I'd practice it sitting down. So I practiced the speech stretching, walking, cooking, sitting, listening to music, not listening to music. So I knew all of that was an essential part of truly learning those lines. But I tried something new with this particular speech that I found really quite effective and wanted to share with you. Great speeches often start with, a famous first line, the quality of mercy is not strained. Everybody remembers the first line, to be or not to be. How many people remember the last line of those speeches? Not that many people. So I thought to myself, I want to be as comfortable with the end of that speech as I am with the first line. So for Terry's speech, I decided to learn the last paragraph first. And then I would go to the next little chunk of dialogue. As you can see with the script, there's like little chunks of dialogue. I started at the back and worked my way to the front. That's how I decided to learn Terry's speech for episode 4. So the section I learned the first was, gosh, thank you so much for coming, Josh. It's a pleasure to talk to you. That super smiley part where he talks about, I'd love a recording of this, and partial of to the picture of me and Michelle Obama. I wanted to be as comfortable with the end of that speech so that actually, as I worked my way through the speech, I would become more comfortable. Because remember, you're more comfortable with that which you have said more often. So if I had learned it, A to Z, like front to back, I would have been just by the nature of repetition, I would have repeated the first section of that speech twice as many times as I'd practiced the end. And I knew that I had to sustain energy, not only sustain it, but actually build energy. Like the speech looks like this. It arcs up. So I said, I need to have more energy by the end than I do at the beginning. So I said, I'm going to learn the last paragraph so that feels like home. That's like home base. I'm like running for home base. And I'm in my own house and my own chair. I will run it so many times. It will be my to be or not to be moment. Like I couldn't forget it in any instance. And I just worked my way backwards. And then I'd say the second to last paragraph, and then the last section. Then I go to the third last paragraph, then the second, then the first. So you can see that the back part of that scene just gets more repetitions. And so I just learned the whole thing in reverse. That was new to me. I think it was really effective because I gained confidence as I would say the lines. As I moved from the beginning to the end, I would get stronger. So that's the first thing that I did with this particular speech. The other thing that Rupinder built into the speech were the sections of it. The sections are all built around when Terry presses the stop on the record button and then presses start on the record button. So you have to look at the entire speech in three parts: part 1, part 2, and part 3. Part 1 is all of the speech prior to the moment where he presses the button. That has a certain kind of energy, tonality, playfulness. By the end, Terry's pissed. And he pushes the button. He says, "This is off the record, and I want you to hear it." And then there's that middle section. And then at the end of that section, after he's finished saying what he wants to say, he pushes the button again, and then he goes back to super smiley Terry. "Thank you so much, Josh." So again, that section, tonally, emotionally, completely different. There's 3 sections. Rupinder built it into the very foundations, it's on the page. So when you think about that particular structure, I, as a swimmer, would start at the beginning, holding my bag of popcorn, scrambling my way through the water, all the way until I could grab onto that, the edge of the pool, which is the button, so I had to make it all the way across to that moment. And then I catch my breath. And now I want you to hear this part. And I would scramble through the water, through the ideas, the thoughts, the energy of the second part, swimming until I got to the next part. I grab it, he presses the button to record, and then he swims, he's on the home stretch and he swims back home. So that's kind of how I thought about that speech on a sort of functionally structural level. It's in 3 parts. I practiced this speech endlessly, again and again. I think that's the one big note I have for any actors out there. There's simply no way that you can learn your lines well enough. When you think you have them, you haven't scratched the surface of it. One of my great teachers in my life is Dr. Rosemary Bank at Kent State University, where I got my MFA. She said the most fascinating thing about reading Hamlet. She said, if you've read Hamlet once, you haven't read it. the second time that you read that play that it's really your first time. It's far too dense. It's far too sophisticated. And that's how I feel about lines. After you've read them 1,000 times, then you know them. That makes for a really boring life. I was learning the speech in the middle of a pandemic. I had nothing else to do. I mean, I could have watched TV like many of us did. But I knew I was there, hopefully to make history, because that speech is the greatest piece of writing that I've seen come out of Hollywood in about 20 years, 25 years. This includes the incredible speech for Sitting Bull and Woman Walks Ahead and many of the other great projects that I've been involved in. Nothing approaches it in terms of what it requires from me as an actor. At times, you know, in Rupinder's writing, sometimes he's playful. Sometimes he's annoyed. Sometimes he's filled with rage. Sometimes he's righteously angry. Other times he's gleeful, having won the victory of beating Josh at his own game. Truly the greatest writing out of Hollywood in 20 years. How does one really start to tackle it? It's really through repetition. It's really through rigorous decision-making. Remember, as you read it, there were scenes that were live, meaning, you know, I would be in the same space as Dustin, and we would be filming the scene, and we would be a two-shot, or camera would be over me onto him, or over his shoulder onto me. You know, singles, close-ups, lots of repetition of live action scenes. But there were whole sections where the camera would be on Darius and the flashback sequences, but I would be, and you only hear Terry in voiceover. So really the speech is maybe 4 scenes, maybe 5 scenes, and like 2 of them are full flashbacks. Terry is not on screen. If you look at that, there's no requirement for me to memorize those parts. That's a voiceover. I could just read it aloud. And they would use my recorded voice and overlay it over the material in the editing room that included the young Darius, the young Terry. And of course, that's exactly what they did. But as an actor who believes in rigor, I knew that I had to know those sections as well as when I was on camera, because they're all connected. They all lead from point A to Z. So no one asked me to memorize those sections, but I knew I had to. I had to be able to go through his entire speech without stopping. This was a smart move on my part because they didn't yell cut ever. There was no, in the process of filming, there was no, oh, now this is the part where, you know, we are, you know, not seeing Terry and we're seeing, you know, the flashback. We filmed it as if there would be no flashbacks. This was Sydney and Sierra's decision. And I, thank God, was prepared to be able to perform it as if there would be no cuts. I also did it for a practical level. Like there was just no way I could, you know, memorize little chunks and little chunks and little chunks without knowing the missing bits, like the bridges from one scene to the next. I had to see it as a map, a full map. So I learned all of it, even the parts where I knew I wouldn't be on camera. Also, in terms of the emotional build of the speech, there is no way, you know, when you say, I need a running start, you know, like if you start standing still, you start running, or if someone like runs across the start line, they're going to be going much faster sooner. So I knew that when the camera would come back off the flashback, that I couldn't be starting from a dead stop. I knew that I had to have a running start by knowing that material and living through it emotionally as the character in conversation with Josh. So I just learned the whole speech, the whole thing. I think it's probably about 6 minutes long, 6 or 7 minutes long. In the final edit, much of the material that you heard was cut because they, you know, for brevity, for, you know, to allow all the other fantastic things that were happening in the episode and all the other great actors that were doing incredible work. We needed to see them as well. It wasn't just all about me. You know, in the end, it's probably about a 6-minute scene, maybe like 5.5 minutes, perhaps. But it's really powerful. The response on Twitter and, you know, and various critics is, you know, that speech at that point, it was an important hinge moment for our series that, you know, at this point, even Mike Schur, one of our our executive producers, he said, by the time that speech happens in episode 4, he goes, I think we've really changed the direction of the whole show. The whole show becomes, I think, more potent. Much of this is really due to my incredible scene partner, Dustin, and to the brilliant direction of Sydney Freeland and the support of Sierra, who was on the set during that day. Just like with Woman Walks Ahead, we filmed that thing all day long. So I had to sustain energy, you know, from take to take. You know, that office, we were filming on the Paramount Studios in Hollywood, and the walls could be removed. All those walls could be removed so that the cameras could be set up everywhere. Multiple cameras. We had probably 3 cameras up, you know, for every take. So 3 camera crews manning each camera, focus pullers, operators, etc. That kind of coverage is expensive. Like to have that many bodies on set, that equipment is incredibly expensive to rent. So when a network is investing in our excellence, I have an obligation as you know, an established artist to bring the most that I can do as an actor and an artist. And what's interesting about what Sydney and Sierra and Dustin in his playing brought to my work was that they moved me. I remember during the very first run through that day, I had tears in my eyes. You know, by the time I finished, you know, those lines, it's like, you don't know what it's like to crawl back to zero. You've never had to, and you never will. I was full of anger and rage. You might call it self-pity. And Sydney and Sierra kept moving me with subsequent takes to a more powerful position. The result of that direction, of that support, led to the performance that I was able to give. I think they knew that Terry, I think they understood that Terry was more powerful than I understood him to be. And they lent that belief to my performance until I could meet it. I've spoken on social media and in interviews about the incredible work that Dustin did as my scene partner. I said, you poor guy. There he is, you know, he's poking the bear, you know, with these things like, aren't you really a sellout? You know, like this poor guy, he's got to say all that stuff. And it allows him to goad Terry into unleashing on him. So he's like almost like you know that blow up sort of doll that you would punch. He was like my punching bag for a day, laying all this heavy truth on him, all this anger. And Dustin was so gracious. He just was fully present and he took all the hits. I called him a sorcerer at one point because, you know, he's, you know, this wonderful fit guy. In that chair, he shrunk. As Terry got more powerful, he just literally shrunk down until he was kind of like, of course that helped me. How generous of him. But I will tell you that I was distraught when I left the set. I was so disappointed in myself. And I have to explain why. You know, I'd done all this preparation. I knew how important this was. I knew this was history making, but I was crushed. And although everyone said, great work, I didn't feel that it was. I actually felt really let down. I feel like I let myself down. And one of the reasons was the arc of this speech was so long that I would sustain and then I'd make a mistake and then I'd have to pick myself up and then go again. And then just, I think I had maybe in the day only 1 or 2 takes. And I think I did this about 35 times, 40 times. Because I have to say the whole speech, you know, all different angles, all different sizes. Yeah, maybe 40 times. To say it 40 times, that's 40 times 6 minutes. And sometimes we'd have to cut because something happened and we'd go back. And I felt like there was only 1 or 2 times where I feel like I was like, whew, I think I nailed it. I think I got it. Only 2 times. All the other 34 times or, you know, 38 times were like, oh, okay, the first part was good, but the last part was bullshit. What the hell? Do better. Or, you know, like the beginning would be like, oh, that was weird at the beginning, and the middle got good, and then the ending sucked again. And I was like, am I too smiley? Am I this? I went home. I remember I, you know, opened a bottle of wine. I was just like, you know, I talked to my wife. I was like, didn't go great. I said, I was disappointed in myself. I felt like I needed to do 34, 35 perfect takes. But that's impossible. All they need is one that they can cut together, you know, with other elements. That's the beauty of film. But coming out of theater, I was holding myself to a really an unfair standard, you know, that every time it was, you know, a paying audience and every take had to be good. So I think that was still a vestige of my theatrical background and how I would approach that kind of work. So, you know, I felt disappointed, but then, you know, I'd hear back from, you know, Sydney or Sierra going, we're looking at footage. It looks so good. You were so great. And I was like, thank you. Thank you. I hope so. I hope so. I didn't believe them. And then I finally saw it all cut together. And I was like, oh, this is not as bad as I thought it was. And I've since watched it many, many times. And it's a good performance. I'm proud of it. But again, it's all really due to many people. Rupinder for writing it, Sierra Teller Ornelas, Mike Schur and Ed Helms for dreaming up the show, Sydney Freeland for directing the hell out of that episode, and me, Dustin Milligan for his incredible partner work, Darius, who was so fantastic as the young Terry. Like, I'm watching him, I'm like, that kid's incredible. My family, Renee and Maya and Chata, who really contributed really to how I got to that scene. Like, all scenes are contextualized. Like, the scene before that is the scene at the lacrosse game, and that was just so much fun to play with Kimberly. That allowed me to jump into this scene with real vigor and context. The one last thing I'll say about the sort of some of the physical choices I was making relate to body and voice, and I just want to mention those. Knowing that the speech is really in 3 parts, I knew that I wanted the first part of the speech to be in a slightly higher register. Somewhat, like, I guess, like my normal speaking voice. And then the middle section where he goes, I want you to hear this. And he tells him some heavy truth. I knew I wanted to speak in my Indigenous register. So I made a choice to drop my voice in the middle section. And then afterwards, when I pressed the button, I said, thank you again, Josh, my register goes back up. So just as a technical note, watch the variations in my voice. And then physically, I needed to amplify that. So in the first section, Carrie's standing, and he's also standing in the third section. He sits in the middle section. And that hadn't been scripted, and we sort of worked it out with Sydney and Sierra and myself. And like, would he be behind his desk? Would he lean on his desk? And then finally I sat down, and they were like, "Ooh, that feels good." And I was like, "Yeah, that feels good to me too." So in the first section, he's standing. In the middle section, he's sitting. And the last section, he's standing. But there's also the weight of his body. He's toying with heaviness in the first section. He commits to it in the middle section. Earlier this year, I was teaching online screen acting at York. And one of the students described that scene, and they said, yeah, you were so heavy in that middle section. It was like you were a cannonball. And now when I look at it now, I'm like, yeah, that's it. I just let everything just settle and be heavy like a cannonball in that middle section. And then I stood up and I pressed it, and I was like, I was light again. So these contrasts of body energy and weight and voice, as well as the incredible work of my scene partners and directors and the people around me. Thank you also to Susanna White, Jesse Bruchak, the people in my career who allowed me to first make the small swims, the little small swims that allowed me to learn how to swim across the entire pool. Thank you. And without further ado, let's watch that scene.